Hello guys and welcome as always to Let's Talk About It. In today's video we are going to be talking about some of the world's most brutal unsolved murders, part 1. The first unsolved case I have for you is that of the infamous Lake Bodom murders. On June 4th, 1960, 4 Finnish teenagers, 2 15-year-old girls named Malia Bjorklund and Anja Mäki, along with 2 18-year-old boys named Seppo and Tero Boisman and Nils Wilhelm Gustafsson, went on a camping trip along the shore of Lake Bodom, which is located in the city of Espoo, not far from Helsinki. Arriving for their trip, they set up a single tent which the 4 of them planned to sleep in. They then went about enjoying the lake, each other's company, and doing whatever it is that teenagers do. At some point, they all decided to go to bed. However, between them going to bed and the following morning, something went very, very wrong. The following morning, at around 11 AM, a carpenter by the name of Esko Oiva Johansson came across the group's campsite. And what he discovered was a very gruesome scene. Laying on top of the collapsed tent was Bjorklund, who was naked from the waist down. Inside the tent were the other 2 victims, Mäki and Boisman. All 3 victims were covered in blood, having been stabbed and bludgeoned to death. When authorities arrived on the scene at around noon, they discovered that Gustafsson, the 4th would-be victim of these horrific and brutal attacks, was in fact still alive. However, he was suffering from concussion and severe facial injuries, which he says were inflicted upon him by a man dressed in black with bright red eyes. During the initial investigation, the police discovered that several items were missing. And so, in a seeming effort to wrap things up quickly, the police made a major error. They firstly failed to seal off the crime scene or the surrounding area, and secondly, almost immediately, they enlisted the help of the local people in an effort to try and locate the missing items or find vital evidence. However, due to a lack of organisation and training, it was possible that any evidence was in fact destroyed. Nonetheless, as the investigation got underway, several suspects came to the forefront. These included a man named Carl Valdemar Gillström. Gillström was known to be very hostile towards campers, with reports of him throwing rocks at them, cutting down their tents, and being generally violent towards them. In a drunken rant to neighbours one day, he told them that he had killed the 3 teenagers and had dumped the evidence into his well, which he then had filled in. Police investigated this, but found no evidence to suggest he was involved in the crime, and his wife gave him an alibi that he'd been in bed with her on the night the teenagers died. In 1969, Gillström then committed suicide by drowning himself in Lake Bodom, and on her deathbed, his wife confessed that she had in fact lied for her husband, and she truly believed that he was in fact the Lake Bodom murderer. Then we have a man on whom most public suspicion falls. This is a man named Hans Assmann, who turned up the day after the killings at a Helsinki hospital located around 10 miles from Lake Bodom. When he arrived, he was dirty, dishevelled, covered in blood, and misled doctors about his identity. To further add to the suspicion surrounding him, Assmann claimed to be a spy for the KGB and that he was already a suspect in 5 other murders. Despite strong reasons to investigate him further, the police failed to do so, and the theory goes that he was in fact telling the truth about his KGB spy status, and that the Finnish government didn't want to find out the truth through fear of angering the Soviets. And then in March 2004, the only survivor of the attack, Nils Wilhelm Gustafsson, was arrested for triple murder after the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation claimed they had solved the case. The theory goes that Gustafsson was drinking and was kicked out of the tent, at which point he flew into a rage. He then ended up in a physical fight with Seppo Boisman, which is how Gustafsson got his facial injuries and concussion. However, in revenge, Gustafsson took a knife and a blunt object and murdered his 3 friends. And so, to add more confusion and conspiracy to the case, Gustafsson, whilst under hypnosis, described the man that had attacked him, resulting in a number of composite sketches. Whilst the e-fit strikes a resemblance to Hans Assmann, another man was spotted in the crowd at one of the victims' funerals. The unidentified man, with a very unique face, is thought by many to be the man that Gustafsson described, or a decoy planted by the KGB to throw authorities off the trail that would have eventually led them to Hans Assmann. The late Bodom killer has never been identified, and the chances are it never will be, leaving the late Bodom murders as Finland's most notorious unsolved murder. The second unsolved crime I have for you is known as the Hinterkaifeck murders. This took place on March 31st, 1922, when 6 inhabitants of a small Bavarian farmhouse located near Munich, Germany, were slaughtered. In the 6 months or so prior to one of Germany's most gruesome unsolved murders, strange things have been taking place on the property. A Munich newspaper was found on the grounds, to which no one at the house or the local area subscribed to. Fresh prints were found in snow leading from the forest to a broken machine room door located on the farm, and noises and footsteps could be heard coming from the attic. Despite these things being investigated by the Gruber family, they found no evidence that anyone was in the attic or on the farm itself, leading many people to speculate that the farm was in fact haunted. However, as it would tragically turn out, it wasn't ghosts that the Gruber family and their maid should have feared, but the living themselves, because the end result saw Baumgartner and young Joseph murdered in their beds, and the other 4 victims being lured to the barn one by one, where they were murdered. Despite an entire family suddenly going missing, no one was initially concerned. The Grubers were firstly fairly closed off, and secondly, neighbours reported seeing smoke coming from the chimney, and there was clear evidence that livestock was being cared for, leading to the theory that whoever was responsible for the killings had stayed on the property until April 4th, 1922, a full 4 days after the murders, when a man named Albert Hoffner arrived at the farm to make some repairs. When he received no answer at the door, he waited around an hour and no one turned up. Thinking this to be more inconvenient than worrying, he went about the repairs anyway. The repairs took around 4.5 hours, and during that time, for reasons that are now clear, not a single member of the family turned up. At which point he raised his concerns with a neighbour, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who, along with 2 friends, went to search the farm, where, disturbingly, they discovered the 6 bodies. The 2 victims in the house, and the 4 victims in the barn. The discovery was immediately reported to police, who, upon investigation, concluded that all 6 victims had been killed with a mattock, which is a farming tool with a wide head chisel at one end and a blade at the other. And it was also speculated that more than one person was responsible for the murders due to the fact that the 4 victims in the barn had been stacked up. And then we have probably the most heartbreaking element of the case, which is that 7-year-old Casilia was found with bald patches, with it being believed that out of sheer terror, she'd pulled out clumps of her own hair, which were found gripped in her hand, as she lay dying alongside her grandparents and her mother. And then, inexplicably, after the bodies were taken away, a physician ordered all 6 victims' heads to be removed, and for the skulls to be given to a clairvoyant in an effort to find metaphysical evidence that would lead authorities to the killer or killers. However, this clearly led to nowhere and only resulted in the 6 victims of the brutal massacre being buried without their heads. During the course of the investigation, hundreds of people were interviewed, which led to several theories as to the true identity of the Hinterkaifeck murderer, with most of them revolving around the true identity of the father of Victoria's son, Joseph. It is theorised that the boy's real father is in fact the man that discovered the bodies, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, and that he had decided to silence the entire family about the affair he was having with Victoria. Another, much more disturbing theory is that Joseph was the product of an incestuous relationship between Andreas and his daughter Victoria, both of whom had already been convicted of the crime in 1915. And that on discovering that Joseph was not in fact his son, Schlittenbauer had then taken revenge by murdering the entire family. But there was also speculation that Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, who was believed to have died in 1914 during World War I, had in fact survived. After staying away for several years, he decided to reconnect with his wife. Upon arriving at the farmhouse, he discovered that she had a son and, in his eyes, she had been unfaithful to him. leaving him with no choice but to sentence her and the entire family to death. However, these theories have often been dismissed due to contrary evidence, leaving the Hinterkaufman murders as another unsolved mystery. The final unsolved murder I have for you took place in February of 1957, when in the Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighbourhood, a young man came across a JCPenney box. Upon opening the box, he discovered a dead body. However, out of fear of losing the muskrat traps he had set up in the local area, he did not tell police about the discovery until a day later, claiming that he thought it was a doll, but could not be certain. Shockingly, he was not the only person to have discovered the body and failed to immediately report it to the police, because another man by the name of Frederick Manonis came forward to police, making claims that he had chased a rabbit into the bush, at which point he came across the dead body. It turned out, though, that the reason he was in the woods was not because he had chased a rabbit, but because he was spying on those living at a Catholic home for wayward girls. It was then, on February 25th, 1957, when authorities arrived on the scene, that they discovered that the body belonged to that of a boy aged 3 to 6 years old who was naked and wrapped in a flannel blanket. Examination of the boy's body discovered that he was covered in bruises that were consistent with abuse, was severely malnourished, and had died as a result of multiple blows to the head. And it was also believed that he had been given a bath or submerged in water due to wrinkled toes and fingers, and that his hair had been cut short after his death due to hair being found all over his body. The case attracted massive attention in Philadelphia, with 40,000 flyers being printed out by the Philadelphia Inquirer, the crime scene being combed over time and time again, and every scrap of evidence and possible lead being thoroughly investigated. However, all of this led to nowhere, and the identity of the boy still remains a mystery to this day, leading the media to dub him the boy in the box. Over the years, several theories have been put forward. For example, there is a theory that, due to his hair having been cut short after his death, that the boy was in fact raised as a girl, which is why nobody has come forward to identify him. Another theory states that he was an orphan who lived in a foster home where he suffered an accidental death, either by drowning in a lake, which is supported by the wrinkled toes and fingers, or from falling from a great height, which is consistent with the head injuries he suffered. This theory was put forward by a medical examiner named Remington Bristow, who was told by a psychic that the boy lived in a mansion turned foster home. It was then in 1961 that Bristow visited the estate sale of a mansion. Whilst there, he discovered a bassinet, which was similar to the type of bassinet that would have been found in the box in which the boy was found. Some further investigation then led Bristow to believe that the boy had in fact been raised by the couple that owned the mansion and was in fact the illegitimate son of their daughter. When he accidentally died, they hid the body in an effort to distance themselves from the truth. Another popular theory began in 2002, when a woman known only as Martha came forward to police to claim that her mother, who had physically and sexually abused her, had purchased the young boy, known as Jonathan, in 1954, with the express intention of abusing him, which she did so for 2.5 years. Martha then goes on to claim that the boy was beaten unconscious one day after vomiting up baked beans and was then given a bath, at which point he died. This led the police to listen to Martha, as the information she was giving them was consistent with information they had about the boy's last meal, information that only the police knew about. However, despite the plausibility of Martha's story, they cannot confirm anything as fact, and doubt was eventually shed on Martha's story by neighbours who claimed that she was mentally ill and that no child had ever lived in the house she shared with her mother. Despite worldwide and continued interest in the case, the identity of the boy that became as America's unknown child still remains a mystery.